Good afternoon and good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you very well.
Great. My name is Elizabeth Eckert, and I am the Chief of Party for the Alliance for Inclusive and Nutritious Food Processing, or AINFP. Our program works with hundreds of processors across Ethiopia, Kenya, Malawi, Tanzania, and Zambia. One of the things that we do is provide technical assistance to address food processors' specific manufacturing and business challenges that hinder their growth. We are hoping to create a more competitive food processing sector. We also support these processors in expanding their supplier base to include smallholder producers and to develop markets for the base of pyramid consumers. Over the last couple of years, the program implementation has faced a number of external challenges, including COVID-19, the recent droughts in the region, and most recently, the Russian war in the Ukraine. It is hitting the global food supply chain and impacting prices of raw material, largely wheat, fertilizer, and fuel. And this limits production, increases costs, and depresses sales. While we support these processors to seek solutions and ensure their business survival and resilience, we also understand that there's a broader conversation that needs to be had across the region about the impacts of these crises and what we can do as a sector in East Africa and Southern Africa to support a more resilient food processing system. Today's webinar brings together actors in the food industry to share the challenges faced so far, the mitigative approaches, and the opportunities available to reduce the effects of the crisis. We are delighted to have Dr. David Nyangi, an agricultural economist with over 20 years of experience in the industry, as our facilitator for today's session. Dr. Nyangi is the former senior agricultural economist and deputy team lead for Feed the Future at USAID Tanzania. He is currently an associate professor for international development at Michigan State University, and he also serves as the policy advisor of the Ministry of Agriculture through USAID's funded Sarah Bora project. We also have a fantastic panel of leaders in the food processing sector and representatives from Kenya Grain Millers Association and Zambia Association of Manufacturers. We have Ken Nyaga, chairman from the United Grain Millers Association from Kenya, Shital Agaral, director, Sunkist Group, Tanzania, Supani Muzamara, acting executive director of the Zambia Association of Manufacturers. Let me turn it over to Dr. Nyange to jump into this exciting panel and lead our discussion today. Over to you, Doctor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Elizabeth, for your introduction on the subject matter. And I'm very much honored, to facilitate today's webinar, whose discussion will be led, by a distinguished member of the panel. But most importantly, to appreciate all the participants that have set time, to participate in today's discussion. As Elizabeth has mentioned, is that currently Africa and the world at large is faced with a crisis on food and energy prices. As you understand, most African countries are low-income countries with a few that are in the middle class. And food contributes, almost takes 50% of their household incomes. So any price change on food commodities has a direct impact in their livelihood. In addition to the current, Russian-Ukrainian war, we clearly understand, drought that has really affected the continent, but also challenges arising, from COVID-19, the supply chain constraints that have triggered, global inflation, but also have contributed, to increase the prices of fertilizer and the other farm input. Africa relies heavily on importation with farm input, from fertilizer to seed to pesticide and the like, vet medicines. And therefore, any price increase in global markets also affects, production and the productivity in the continent. Food processing industry is an integral part of the supply chain, the food supply chain and food supply system. Processors play a very important role in food security, as we understand that cereals are staple, especially in East and Southern Africa. The recipes such as ugali, but also chapatis, which are very popular and used by household on daily basis. A very good example here in Tanzania, we produce about 9 billion tons of cereals, and all these have to be processed. So processors are very important. But also processors play an important role in value addition of semi-processed food commodities, such as crude edible oil, but also wheat, which is mostly imported, from Russia and Ukraine. In fact, an IFPRI study indicates that 32% of wheat imported to Africa is coming from Russia, and about 12% from Ukraine. So you can see a direct impact of this war on the processing sector, but also on food availability and access in Africa. So we'll hear from our panelists on how this crisis has affected their country, but also hear about the government responses as well as private sector response. To start with, I would like to get a perspective from Sheta, from Sunkist Group here in Tanzania, on how this crisis has really affected the food processing sector. Welcome, Sheta.
Thank you, Dr. Nyange. Hello, everyone. My name is Shetal Agarwal, and I represent the company of Sunkist Bakery Limited in Tanzania. Thank you for having me as one of the panelists. Basically, ever since the crisis has started, we have found that there has not been enough supply for wheat to Tanzania. As Dr. Nyange has pointed out, that we are dependent on wheat imports, and most of it is coming from Russia and Ukraine. Prices have soared heavily, and we are always dependent on imported wheat, as I've mentioned earlier. The local wheat is very little available in the market. So as everything else has gone up, including fuel, we have found that the cost of production has shot up, cost of transportation has gone up, cost of sourcing wheat has gone up, and that has obviously impacted our finances as well. Where we used to get things at $320, we were purchasing things at $550. This has really impacted our finances, as well as the availability of wheat has been scarce. Shipping has been delayed. We've not been getting goods on time. Certain companies had opened up markets such as India to export to Africa. Unfortunately, they had a little bit of a shortage in their market, and they had to stop all exports. And that suddenly caused another bit of a lack of supply in our market. So overall, the crisis has really affected the whole of Tanzania, where we are heavily dependent on imported wheat. Thank you, Dr. Nyangi.
Thank you very much, Sheta. Maybe for participants to get a sense of the seriousness of the crisis is that Tanzania annually imports about 1.2 million tons of wheat. And wheat is no longer a luxury. In fact, it has become a staple, and wheat products are consumed in both rural and the urban area. Now, Sheta, in terms of operational capacity of your facilities, how has that changed, compared to last year before, the situation really got worse?
Due to the lack of wheat, we have actually been reduced at our capacity of milling. Where we were producing at 100% because we had available wheat, we have actually dropped our capacity by 40%. This has really affected our operations, our supply to our existing customers. And not only us, it's affected all the millers in Tanzania. There has been a shortage of wheat. The prices have obviously shot up. And people are actually going in for alternative commodities such as maize flour and rice, more dependently on rice. So yes, the shortage has actually incurred a lot of losses, and we have unable to produce at our milling capacity. Thank you, Dr. Nyangi.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sheta. Now I'll turn it to Sopani from Zambia. Tanzania is endowed at least with a seaport, but we understand that, Zambia is a landlocked country. And it would be also good, to get a sense of what is really happening there.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Nyanga. And good afternoon, good morning to the participants in this webinar. My name is Sopani Muzumara, and I am from the Zambia Association of Manufacturers in Zambia. Like Dr. Nyanga has said, Zambia is a landlocked country, and recently we have been changing this perspective to us being a land-linked country because of our position in the region. And so as a land-linked country, clearly we do not have a port. So this crisis then affects us greatly because we are importing our commodities and through the ports, and this has increased our freight costs. And from Mr. Shito in Tanzania mentioned wheat as a major commodity that is being traded. For us in the country, to add on to the wheat is soybeans. And as a country, we already import wheat. So while we are growing wheat by our farmers, there's a lot of demand from production. And so we are importing wheat mostly from Ukraine. So with this Ukraine-Russia crisis, there has been an impact on industry because this soybeans is obviously going into edible oils, it's going into stock feed manufacturing, it's going into soap manufacturing as well. So there's a lot of demand from our manufacturers in the country, and which was already there without the crisis. Because we'd already import the wheat. So with this crisis, there has been an impact, and this impact is mostly on the high freight costs because we have changed our where we are sourcing our raw material from. So at this point, this is the comment that I will give on a unique constraint that Zambia is facing, being a land-linked country, which doesn't have a port. So mostly the distance costs are affecting our manufacturers here in the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sepani. And now I'll turn to Madam Chitata from Malawi, which is another landlocked country. Sepani mentioned earlier that the feed sector has also been affected, and we understand there are a lot of demographic changes in Africa, and the consumption of poultry meat is growing rapidly. Tanzania, for example, Tanzanian youth here, every day they have to eat chicken and French fries. I'm sure that's also happening in Malawi. So it would be great, to hear from Madam Chitata on how this crisis has also affected the feed as well as the poultry sector. It seems Madam Chitata is not online, so maybe I'll direct this question again to Sopani.
Okay, I hope I did get the question correctly, Dr. Nyanga. This is the interventions that we are applying, is it?
Yes. I'm talking about its impact on the poultry and the feed sector.
Okay, so like I did mention, the poultry sector is one sector that is growing. There's a lot of demand for various products, especially that we are looking at growing our agricultural space, and in this is growing our poultry space. So we are seeing this demand into entrepreneurs going into poultry. And so there are SMEs that are starting to go into either chicken rearing or the small livestock such as goat. And these, because of the high costs of importation of raw material, the feed is very expensive, that they are unable to meet that cost. So this has then resulted in higher prices of, say, chicken on the market, higher prices of meat on the market. And you can clearly see this impact, the exacerbation of these prices just from the crisis. So there has been an impact in the whole value chain, not just in the manufacturers getting the soybeans, for example, to crush into edible oils, but we're also seeing that this increase in prices has also translated into the stock feed, because then the prices are higher. So once the manufacturers crush these soybeans, they're selling to the stock feed companies at a higher price because they had purchased it at a higher price. Also, one thing that I would note is that Zambia does not allow GMO. So the sourcing of our raw materials, whether it be wheat or soybeans, is quite expensive and also scarce, because there are limited countries where we can source our raw material from. So ultimately, it's that prices of the end product, whether it be it cold meat cuts or cold or the actual live chicken or meat, these prices have increased, and this is being felt by the end consumer.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sopan, for sharing that experience again from Zambia. Now, my next question will go to Ken from Kenyan, United Grain Millers Association. It will be interesting to know if this impact is also felt in other food grains beyond the imported grains, such as wheat, as well as edible oil. So what is the experience in Kenya?
Thank you very much, Dr. David. The situation in Kenya, is no different from the other countries, though we are not affected directly. But for the maize millers in Kenya, we still have our own portion of problems that we would also attribute it to what is happening, the crises that are there in Russia and Ukraine. Now, one of the things we need to realize is when we look across the value chain, basically you miss the source, then the whole value chain becomes affected. So in a real sense, when the farmers don't get the fertilizer, you expect a lot of change across the value chain. So this is basically what has happened in Kenya. And I would not basically say it's because of fertilizer alone. It's only that these crises, when they came, actually they compounded the crisis. We had a crop failure in Kenya due to weather patterns. Then on top of that, now what came on now is about this issue of the crisis in Ukraine. So the fertilizer also was quite expensive for us. A bag of fertilizer was going for almost 6,500, which is unreachable to most of the farmers. So this one brought a lot of problem to us, and that's why we experienced a big problem in terms of maize. And actually we wanted to start sourcing our maize from the neighboring countries, that is Tanzania, Zambia, and Malawi. And till now, this is where we are getting our maize from, though also the prices are very high, because I believe this global food problem is not only in Kenya. So you find the countries that are able to produce maize, the prices are really high. And not even in Africa alone, even globally. I remember we tried, our government tried some time back to get some maize so that they can subsidize from Mexico. And it was also very high prices. So I think the whole thing, it's emanating from these issues we have in the crisis we have in Ukraine and Russia. So yeah, that's the position we have here in Kenya.
Thank you very much, Ken. I have an additional question. I understand clearly that food grain processing is very much associated also with storage. And for many years, government have been monitoring public stocks, but not much, private stock. As an association, what effort are you making in order to make information on private stock information available to the public and to the policymakers?
Thank you very much for that question. I think this is one of the big elephants we have in the association in Kenya, because basically, like the group that I chair, the United Grain Millers, we are talking of 300 plus millers who are spread across this country. So one of the things that we have just come to realize, or we have learned, especially during this COVID and Russian Ukraine crisis, is that we need to plan ourselves for the storage. Now, one of the biggest issues we have is how we can come together and we get a partner that we can try to come together with. I've tried to reaching the government with my committee that we run this association with, and we've done some letters to the Ministry of Agriculture to see what kind of help we can get from the government. Only that also on the other side, we also understand there is a government agency, NCPB, National Cereals and Produce Board, that has these silos where you can store your grains. So we want to see how we can come up with our own. Is a plan that is there. We are trying to see how to actualize it, though we still have limitations of capital, because it's an expensive venture, and we are looking forward to see how we can actualize it. Thank you so much. And it will go along actually in helping us, especially during like this period that we were in, to see how we can keep the prices of food at a lower price. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ken, for your responses. Now, my next question will go to Haimano from Ethiopia. I hope I pronounce your name correctly. We have been discussing so far about the supply side, and it will be interesting to hear on the demand side and how it's affecting the millers. Haimano from Ethiopia.
And Doctor, it appears that she has dropped off, so perhaps you could direct your question to another one of the panelists.
Okay, thank you very much, Elizabeth. This one, I'll direct it back to Sheta.
Yeah, sorry. Is this about the crisis, how we're going to emerge from the crisis?
Yeah, no. The question is, on the demand side, do you see that impact on the demand side? So far, we've been talking about the supply, availability of wheat, availability of unrefined edible oil. And it will be interesting now to look at the demand side. Do you see any changes on demand?
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, due to the higher prices of imported wheat, the cost of production has gone up because of the fuel prices have gone up as well. Wheat flour has become more expensive, and that has actually pushed a lot of people going into alternative products such as maize and rice. We've actually seen a lot of huge shift towards rice in Tanzania. Maize was there, but unfortunately, we have experienced a bit of a drought, and there has not been enough maize, as Mr. Ken could even vouch that not enough products has been exported from Tanzania into Kenya. So the demand has definitely dropped off, but it's actually dropped off not to a certain extent of, as we said, that we are milling at a 40% reduced capacity. So people have actually started looking at alternative foods because wheat is not available easily into the market. Thank you, Dr. Nyangi.
Thank you very much, Sheta. I know one of the discussion that has been going on here in Tanzania is the possibility of introducing alternative, blended products. So instead of selling, 100% wheat flour, the suggestion is to blend wheat flour with, less expensive, cereals such as sorghum, millet, and the cassava, which is practiced in some of the African countries. How is that proposal received by millers here in Tanzania?
From the millers we've spoken to in Tanzania, I don't think anybody's actually looked at how we can blend these different varieties of crops into wheat flour. Wheat flour, as you've mentioned, has got its own specific use in the African market, especially in Tanzania, where we make chapatis, we do make mandazis, and there are of a certain type which are accepted in by the population. So we need to carefully study of what can we blend with wheat. There are certain ways of blending a few percentage of sorghum with wheat, which has been done in the past, but I don't think any miller has actually looked into how we can incorporate different cereals, cheaper cereals, into wheat, as well as how will that affect the products which use wheat as the main ingredient, such as bread. And we do have a bakery ourselves, and we have tried looking at different alternatives of mixing wheat flour with something else which can complement the bread. And it's been very difficult to find something which can blend and we can make a product which is very similar to what we have in the market. So to answer your question, Dr. Nyange, is we as millers have not looked at the possibilities of using alternative produce to blend with wheat flour. Thank you, Dr. Nyange.
Thank you very much, Sheta. I would like to hear from Ken, from Kenya. How is the situation there? How are the processors adapting to the new situation, particularly in making, in processing affordable products for consumers?
Thank you very much, Mr. Nyange. Now, I just want to touch briefly. You've talked about branding, and I felt I think we also need to raise just some few comments there. Some years ago, 2-3 years ago, I think our Kenyan government started the process whereby they had come up with the four types of food brands that we were to do, so that we can try to ease the pressure on maize. Because currently now, as we speak, we cannot say that ugali is the cheapest food in Kenya. No, it is not. We are actually almost at par with wheat. So it's becoming very hard for a common person, a consumer, to be able. It's basically above reach of mostly the less fortunate in the society. I mean, to be able to get it. So one of the things the government and they thought about is to come with the issue of blending, whereby this one would have eased a lot of pressure on maize, so that whatever we are able to grow here in Kenya, whatever we are able to get from the farmers here, can be able to meet the demand that is required for maize here in Kenya. So basically, I think breeding is one of the way, and we hope the incoming government will look at it and see how to work together with us, so that we try to avoid such issues like the ones that we have. We really don't rely so much on imports. It will cut short of this so much, because some of those breeding funds we are looking for, they are actually drought resistant crops, and we have a big chunk of Kenyan land that is not used for cultivation. So they had looked and they found it better. It was actually to work so well. Now, coming to your question, Dr. Nyange, we as millers now, we have no choice now. We have to adjust ourselves towards what is happening in the field. Basically, I know one of the things is most of the millers, they have cut their production. They have cut less on their production. There are people who used to run for 24 hours. Nowadays, you find it's only like 12 hours. Some are running even for 3 hours, simply because this crop is not available. The maize is not available. So it has really affected most of the millers. So basically, what I've seen most of the millers doing now, they are thinking of incorporating other crops so that they can be able to mill. At least you have 2-3 brands of different crops, whereby you can be. Some are doing millet, others are doing cassava, and this one is coming up so well. And the thing I want to appreciate is actually the Kenyan consumers. They're adapting to this kind now of food that is coming up in the market. So with research, I want to believe that if we can bring the consumers to our level, the way we align ourselves in the processing of these foods, then I think in the future we may not have the kind of problem that we are having out of such crisis or any other crisis that may arise in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ken, for your comprehensive response. One of the challenges that countries in Eastern and Southern Africa are facing is competition in food grains between, human consumption and livestock feed. And there have been some discussion on the introduction of alternative cereals, such as yellow maize, specifically for the feed sector. As you understand, the staple here in Eastern and Southern Africa is white maize. And one of the proposals coming from the stakeholders is by promoting production of yellow maize or even GMO maize for the feed sector, that would at least lessen competition between human and livestock. in terms of food grain, and hence help to mitigate, food prices. So what's the reaction, from your countries? I'll direct this question to Sopani.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Nyange. So definitely, with the increase in population, firstly, but also population leading to the increase in value-added products. Yes, there's growing demand for human consumption, but also going into livestock. And what you have mentioned on yellow maize production, as a country, we have enough arable land, I would say, that is not currently being used. So if I did get your question correctly, then it's something that has not reached much of a challenge as a country to start farming strictly for livestock. But we have huge farms that are integrated in that they have farms that have where they farm the actual, whether it is maize or whether it is wheat or barley, whatever it is that they are farming, they have that then feeds into production into their livestock, whether it is cattle that goes into beef, but also they have milling plants that then produce mealie meal that goes for human consumption. So we have these a few big companies that are integrated that are producing for both the human consumption, but as well as feeding into livestock. But generally, as a country, this we haven't yet reached at that level where farmers are strictly farming for livestock. But I'm sure that as the population is growing, this is definitely a demand that will then come in on where farmers start to weigh options, or where companies start to weigh options of whether it should get into human consumption. You did mention ugali, we call it in Shima here, whether it goes directly into that production or it should get into value addition, and then it's added. Once value is added, it's changed into beverages. We have local beverages such as the mahewus, the traditional brews, alcoholic and non-alcoholic brews. So of course, once we get to that point, there's need to strike a balance, which is why we're encouraging that more and more people get into production because there is arable land in the country.
Yeah, thank you very much, Supan, for your good response. Now, my next question is government response. How's the government responded across countries to the current crisis? I'll start with Ben. I'll start with Ken, sorry. Ken, how has the Kenyan government responded to the current crisis?
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I was waiting for Ben to talk, but it's fine. It's okay with Dr. Nyange. So I think I've seen there are some steps that the government has taken. Though I think I would try to summarize it in two ways. There is a short term and there is a long term. Currently, when this crisis came up, and after we had all this problem with the sourcing of maize and everything, the first thing the government did was to try and see how they can subsidize the flour, the maize flour, because actually it had hit a very high level that it had never hit in this country. And though it worked, but it was not a step that could be sustained by the government. It was able to run for 1 month. And when we looked at the figure that was there, 1 month it costed the government over 8 billion Kenya shillings to subsidize just the maize flour. So basically, I think with the incoming government, they saw it better to try and invest this kind of money to the farmers for a long-term solution to this problem. And this is where they came up and they decided now to subsidize actually the fertilizer. As we speak, this fertilizer arrived last week in our country and is actually retailing at 3,500 from the previous prices that we had of 6,500. So basically, this one is reachable to everyone, and we are getting reports that the farmers are happy and that they are actually going for it. So we are looking at now the next harvest that we are expecting maybe by the end of the year, that now we shall be having a bumper harvest, if at all there won't be any crop failure due to the change in climate or something like that. So the government has really done a lot. Recently, there is something else the government came up with. It's also looking at the issues of the bank facilities that these processors and actually acquired during these times, and they are even getting till now. And I think there is also a discussion on that. As late as yesterday, we had there some lenders, mobile lenders, who actually decided even to lower their interest. And we are also looking forward to some that had already been declared as unfit to go for credit by CRB. They have been told we are waiting around 4,000 people to be removed out of register. So I think all these will now enable the processors who have been there now to go back to the drawing board again and know where they went wrong and pick it up from there. So we are looking forward at so much that the government has for us, especially the processors and the SMEs in general in Kenya. We believe they have something better for us, and we are looking forward at how to avoid such a situation like the one that just caught us unaware. Thank you so much, Dr. Nyange.
Thank you very much, Ken. We understand one of the challenges for subsidy program is that they are fiscal burden to the government. And once you start a subsidy program, it's difficult to stop it because there are some political implications. So what do you think will be the situation in Kenya if the government lifted the subsidy?
Okay, one of the things, Dr. Nyange, I heard the head of state saying that subsidy has come to an end immediately when he took the oath of office, and he said very clearly, and he explained it to Kenyans because basically we had the issue of unga and we had the issue of petroleum, whereby we used to subsidize also fuel in this country, and a lot of money went into this, and he said the government cannot afford this. So what the president just said is that Kenyans have to bear with this for a short time as they look for a long-term solution. Because if we look at the short term and using all this money, the kind of money they are using during the short term can be used to avoid such scenarios in the future for the long term. So I think I'm happy at the steps that are being taken. For now, even as we speak, currently it's not that unga now has, it's almost 200 shillings a packet of 2 kg in Kenya. And well, I think now even the consumers are used to this. But we are expecting within the end of the year, after the harvest that is coming in, to start going down. Then from there, what can already interrupt this program of the government is only the weather patterns. That's the only thing in case of crop failure or anything like that. But I think I like the interventions the government is taking for the long term. And I am sure, as they said, that they have no time and they have no money for subsidy. that the government is going to do that, but look at the long-term solution. And as long as the long-term solutions are there, then I'm sure it is possible to do away with the subsidies.
Thank you very much, Ken. One of the challenges in managing crises is how to trade off, short-term interventions, that will provide immediate relief, and investment, for long-term growth of the sector. A very good example here in Tanzania during the last 3 years, the government has been gradually raising import duty on some of the imported food commodities, such as wheat, edible oil, and others, mainly in order to temporarily protect the domestic industry and promote domestic production so as to reduce dependence on import. As you understand, African countries have become really a major importers of food commodities. There are a number of studies. I think one study was estimating that Africa is spending about $30 billion a year in importing food commodities. But there's another study that has even made a much higher estimation of about $50 billion a year. And by importing agricultural commodities, it means indirectly you're exporting, the much needed jobs, to other countries where the imported commodities come from. Because of the current crisis, I understand recently the government has relaxed some of these import duties and tariff so as to provide short-term relief. But on the other hand, the local processors are kind of also disappointed because they know, some of these imports, if are not well managed, could really have a negative repercussion to the local processing sector. Now, I'd like you to hear from Sheta about, the perception of local processors as some of the import duties are relaxed in order as a mitigation measure for the current crisis.
Thank you, Dr. Nyange.
Sorry, Shital, before you jump in, I just wanted Dr. Nyange to know that our panelist from Malawi has also joined now, and after Shital answers, she might also be able to weigh in.
Thank you, Liz. Good to know.
Right. Now, for the local processors, in the wheat industry, Dr. Nyange, there has been actually no reduction of wheat import duty, which has been implemented by the government. There has been in cooking oil, as you are aware, palm oil has been reduced duty to elevate the problem of higher prices in the market. So the government has actually taken an action to mitigate the higher prices in certain commodities. Coming back as well to looking at what else has the government done, there has been, as Mr. Ken has mentioned, short-term and long-term. Short-term, the government in Tanzania has also reduced the prices of fertilizers. They've actually given some subsidies for fertilizer cost, and fertilizer costs have drastically reduced. Financial institutions have been encouraged to lower the interest rates, giving it out to local farmers for them to encourage to borrow money as well as plant and sell. And the government is actually pushing farmers to engage with contracts with processors. So engaging in tripartite contracts whereby the farmer, the processor, and the financial institutions are engaged. I was reading one Q&A was asking what has the Tanzanian team done to mitigate the problem of wheat. So basically, we as processors, I know us as Sunkist, have actually engaged with small-scale farmers and have these contracts in place. And this has started in this year. We've already had these contracts since a couple of years ago with large-scale farmers. Now we have engaged small-scale farmers to be able to do growing wheat for us. and engaging the financial institutions for us. Where the long-term gains are by the government is they're encouraging certain areas which used to be for wheat growing areas in the 1960s and 70s. They had diversified and growing other commodities such as sunflower, barley, and government has actually come up with a directive of saying those wheat growing areas are supposed to be reinstated as wheat growing areas. So government is actually taking some action in order to mitigate the importation costs, importing all commodities. So I think where we are heading in the long term, I believe the government have got a good hand on this. It will take time, but the short-term gain is already the fertilizer cost is going down. People are encouraging more and more farmers to plant different kinds of commodities, as well as the government is honestly looking at long-term plans where they can encourage farmers to grow wheat. And hopefully, one of the areas which they can eventually help farmers is to by increasing import duties for raw materials such as wheat or such as sunflower unprocessed oil. And I believe that the government is heading in the right direction. Thank you very much, Dr. Nyange.
Thank you very much, Isheta. I'm glad now we have a participant from Malawi. I hope she's Madam Chatata. And before we open up the discussion to participants, I would like to get your reaction on the situation in Malawi. We've been talking about the government response. Now, I would like you to, to share your experience in Malawi. We understand that despite being this a crisis, could also be an opportunity for the private sector and farmers. A very good example, in the fiscal year that ended June 2022, Tanzania for the first time was able to export almost 400,000 tons of rice to neighboring countries, where export earning has been over $300 million. This is equal to export earnings, combined export earnings for traditional crops, cotton, coffee, and tea combined. So this shows a great opportunity for regional trade that countries can gain foreign currency through food commodities, similar to what countries are earning from traditional exports such as coffee, cashew nut, and others. In Malawi, do the stakeholders also see this as an opportunity? And what are the opportunities there that the stakeholders see?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Mwangi. Yeah, indeed, in every crisis, there's an opportunity. Like with the Ukraine crisis, I've seen that because of the shortage of wheat, farmers have started mobilizing each other to start growing wheat. So it's being considered as a commercial crop, basically because they saw that the prices started going up, and there was also low supply. At the same time, we've also seen that, like with the maize, most of our maize is being imported, is going through Tanzania to Kenya. So that's already a demand that is coming up. For me, and looking at everything as from a processor point of view, this presents a big opportunity. We just need to plan around it. And just as the private sector has already started mobilizing itself, even without the government coming out to say, hey, this is an opportunity, the private sector have seen that opportunity and are starting to grow the crops for the market. And then we put this also in the perspective of the continental free trading area. I think it's something that we need to consider seriously and look at what are the opportunities that we can maximize on that are coming with this crisis. So for me, let's work hard. It's not going to be easy, but let's work together and look at how can we make use of this opportunity, and how can we maximize on the synergies? I like the conversation on the branding. Yes, millers have not started branding, but what is coming out from the consumers? Because the consumers are still going to need to eat every day, and they are going to be looking at opportunities. So it's time to innovate as Africans and provide the nutritious foods that should substitute the wheat. And even how can we grow seed oils? Because even in Malawi, the cost of cooking oil has skyrocketed, which should be the same case also in the neighboring countries. But we have arable land, just as Zambia presented. How can we maximize on this opportunity? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chatata. I think that was a very good response, that this could be an opportunity for farmers, private sector, and the country at large. There are a number of questions, from the audience, and I would like to read some of them, and any panelist
Over to you, Doc.
Hello. Hello. Yeah. So there's a question about analytical work that is done with regard to the subject matter, particularly in the East Africa. This comes from Kevin Mugenya. I'm aware of a few studies that currently are being undertaken. I know International Food Policy Research Institute in Washington has been doing some macroeconomic studies, we call CG modeling, to look at the potential impact of the current crisis in the households' income, consumption, and the poverty. And I've seen some estimates on potential numbers and the percentage of population that are likely to slide back, to slide, below the national poverty line because of the ongoing study. From the panelists, if you're aware of any other study. For the project which I'm currently coordinating here in Tanzania, soon we'll be starting a survey on food service. And one of the reasons we decided to conduct this research is because we understand a lot of youth and women-owned SMEs are participating in the confectionery industry. There are a lot of, SMEs and also individuals, that are cooking food, particularly chapatis, mandazis, and are selling, on the street, and sometimes, they have small restaurants, and the SMEs in confectionery industry has been very much affected in terms of, price of wheat as well as edible oil. And we hope we'll be able to document on how these SMEs are adapting to the current situation. There are questions with regard to changes in consumers' preference. I think some of the panelists had earlier mentioned about, shifting into consumption of rice and other cereals because wheat has become more expensive. And I would like if there's additional information about that, changes in the consumption habit. Yeah, so hopefully the current ongoing analytical work will be able to inform us on how households are shifting from expensive food items to lesser expensive food items. And it will be also interesting to see how this is changing across, different income groups, but also across, various, I would say, population segments in the country.
Okay, Dr. Nyange, just to come in there. So
Yes, please.
Yes, I just want to touch on the change in consumption patterns of the citizens. So I will not speak from an authority point because we are in the manufacturing sector, but this is from a personal standpoint that I am seeing. So to get to there, I will first add my voice on government interventions. And this one is from last year. So of course, this increase in food prices has not just started from the Ukraine-Russia war. So of course, this has exacerbated this challenge, but we're coming from a COVID-19 pandemic crisis where food prices soared. So last year, the government waived off VAT. So we have a 16% VAT on edible oils, as in other products on the market. And last year, the government waived off the 16% VAT on edible oils because edible oils is crucial for the foods that we prepare. So this waiver was up until October last year, and October we had elections in September, and this was only a month after the new government was sworn in. So there was an extension of this waiver up until January this year, or I'd say December. But after this was lifted, of course, the edible oil, cooking oil prices went up. And currently Zambia, I'm sure you may have heard of the IMF deal where subsidies would be removed from a number of products. So of course we would be looking at food prices going even higher. But of course there's other issues that we are hopeful that will counter this, such as the macroeconomic stability, which I will not get into. But I just wanted to give this background to show that there is an increase in food prices. And from what we're seeing, consumers is, while Nshima ugali that you're mentioning is our staple food, there is now increase in diversifying our plate, whether it's rice or putting in cassava or sweet potatoes, but also for the other market, there's now increase in the niche products, because when we're looking at it from a pricing perspective, we would then alternate into cheaper foods, but we're also looking at the healthy aspect, where a number of our consumers are going into these niche products where alternative to mealie meal, either the sorghum or the millet, the psyllium husks. So we're seeing a lot of these niche products coming up in the country for the higher end market, and this is an alternative to the Nshima or the staple foods that are currently increasing in price. So from this end, from a personal point, it's that consumers are diversifying, moving away from the staple foods, which are increasing in price for healthy reasons. But also on the other end, it's that there's a diversification of the food plate to cheaper. Okay, yeah. So there's that diversity on the food plate because of the increase in cost of what used to be the staple food. So I just wanted to come in there on that.
Thank you very much, Isopan. So what do you think will be the implication in terms of nutrition? As we understand already, malnutrition is quite high in this region. Mm-hmm. And in this type of crisis, I would say it's easier to focus on actual starvation rather than silent hunger, which comes in form of malnutrition. What do you think would be the situation? at the end of this crisis?
Okay, I may not comment on that as because I am not in the health sector, but from a manufacturing point, this increase in nutritious foods, we're looking at nutritious foods now as a country, and of course the costs that go into manufacturing of nutritious foods. Like I mentioned in my previous comment, is that we're seeing a different grouping of people who are moving away from the staple foods because of healthy reasons, but also these healthy foods are quite expensive. So when you look at malnutrition, of course, this then places at not a very good space as a country. But I did mention that I will not go into details because that is not my field. But from my point is that that's something that we need to look at, and which is why it's important to have this fora where stakeholders come together and share ideas, especially from different countries, of what should be done, what should government's focus be, what should manufacturers or private sector, what should their focus be? Should they go more into corporate social responsibility? What should players such as the AINFP focus on or scaling up nutrition? So my comment here would be that everyone works together so that we fight malnutrition. There's already a food crisis, and so it's important that all the stakeholders come together so that we fight other food challenges.
Thank you very much, Sopani. Now my question will go to Madam Chatata. Yeah, do you think the current crisis will be a game changer in motivating both the private sector and the public sector to invest in agriculture? As you understand, the African Union had set, a goal that, all countries should allocate at least 10% of their national budget to agriculture, and very few countries have achieved that target. Do you believe the current crisis will be a game changer, or think once the crisis is over, then we will go back to the usual business?
I believe that this is the change we needed to face. Sometimes when crisis happens, it makes you look at yourself and discover what you can do. And I believe that this is the time for African governments to sit and really appreciate what we have amidst ourselves and what we have as countries, but also as a region. I believe that through the experience that we're going to have feeding ourselves, moving forward, we should be able to sustain that, because we don't have a choice, because we have been relying on imported food, but the imported food is not there. We have to feed ourselves. So I believe that this is the time to really search and also look at our budgets and see where can we tap from. And as I mentioned, the food price, it's not just scarce, but the food prices are also going up, which makes the most reasonable decision is to grow it ourselves so that we can sustain. Of course, it's coming also with fertilizer. Like from a grower's perspective, I've also seen people are coming up with fertilizer, organic fertilizers. I've seen a number of local companies coming up. So it's going to be a revolution. I foresee that in the next 2 years, we are going to see companies that have actually come out of this crisis because they saw a need, and now they are providing for that need. As she said, people are also starting to look at, okay, what are the other foods that we can eat, of course, for healthy reasons, but not only for healthy reasons, because there's scarcity. So you have to find an option. So I am very positive that from this process, we are going to sustain ourselves. It's the same case when COVID happened. There are things that we started doing. Like in my company, we sell herbal teas. We saw the rise of herbal teas. At first, herbal teas were for expatriates, but now we are seeing Malawians buying the herbal teas because now they understood the health benefits from it, and now it has become part of their diet. So in this process, if we position ourselves very well, we are going to win. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chatata. Ken, are you also optimistic that the current crisis will be a game changer in terms of agricultural transformation in Africa?
Of course. This one, I'm telling you, is only a fool who cannot learn from it. So what has really happened, what is happening currently, and basically in Africa, I think should make everybody now change his thinking and his mindset. I think I was looking at it on another different scenario. These are just two countries that have this crisis. Suppose we had another 2 or 3 majorly who are good in farming and all these other things. What would happen to Africa? Africa, we are blessed. We have a land that is so productive. So what actually we should do right now is to learn from what is happening. We learn from what is happening right now. Try to come up with homemade solutions that can be lasting. I've heard this lady from talking about organic manure and this other stuff. I mean, I believe even from the time I was young, I just came to learn about this fertilizer, this one we are using just the other day. We used to learn on using the manure and this other stuff. And it used to work. So I think it's the high time now the government looks at what can be done to avoid such scenarios like the one we have. Africa can become a food basket for the world if we can be able to sit down and plan ourselves. Some of these things we are doing in Africa, I think they are the things that are costing us this. We can actually be self-reliant. Of course, we cannot say that we cannot import, but 80% we can try to come up with own-made solutions that we can be able to sustain ourselves even during hardships like the ones that we are having now. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you very much, panelists, for a very informative discussion. Today we have looked at the nature and the extent of the current Russian-Ukrainian war crisis in Africa, how the global food price and energy, price crisis has affected our countries. We have discussed how governments have responded and how the stakeholders are adapting to the current situation. We have looked at both the supply and demand factors related, to the food processing industry. And I like the consensus that, this could be a game changer, to, African agriculture that would motivate investment by both private and the public sector in the sector, and therefore catalyze transformation and create economic opportunities for our country. Before I turn back to Elizabeth for final comments, I would like to hear if any of our panelists has, last point or last statement, to our audience. I start with Isheta.
Thank you, Dr. Nyange. I would like to have one piece, what I would say, which I think has been covered by Mr. Ken and Ms. Chatata, is the studies have shown that Africa will be the future food basket of the world. As rightly said, crisis gives rise to opportunities. This should be a wake-up call to all entities, all people in Africa, that a crisis between two countries can affect the whole of Africa. We have the land, we have the capability to be self-sufficient and to export to the world. It does take time, but I do believe this crisis has taught us that we need to start looking at alternative foods, alternative ways of farming, and the only way of doing such a thing is being self-sufficient. We need to start planning with the government. We need to start looking at improving our farming techniques, getting the private sector, the farmers, the government in dialogue of how we as a region of Africa can sustain and help each other between neighboring countries. I think that was what I would take from this discussion. Thank you very much, Dr. Nyange. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Isheta. Now I'll turn to Ken. Ken, are you still there?
Sorry. Yeah, I'm here, Daktari. So I think my parting shot is, I think Africa, we are blessed. Africa, we have all what it takes. And I think with the proper planning, as Shitala said, is that Africa, we can be able to feed the world. All what we need to do is go back to our drawing board and see what we can do. We have been blessed with a very fertile land. So some of the things we are talking of food should not be a discussion as it now, if we sit down and plan ourselves. There is so much we should not be suffering just because of two countries that are there just fighting. We need to lower our imports and our expectations so much on those countries. And we come back to Africa and we think what we can do. We can feed them. It should be the other way around, not the way it is right now. So I think out of this, we should have learned a lot. We should sit down in the drawing, come up with something that can be able to sustain Africa and even the whole world in such a way that when such things happen, Africa, we are not affected in any way. We can only be affected in a very small margin. So my parting shot would be, let us work together. Let us consult further. Right now, I've known what in Malawi they do, what the other countries do, and I would like to learn even more and more and more. And I would, in my parting shot, also include the issue of blending. I think this is the way Africa on.
Thank you very much, Ken. Hello?
We will end up to most of the consumers thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ken. Sopani.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nyange, for this discussion. My comment is, my parting comment is that we know that global supply chain shocks have become prevalent in the past 2 years, as seen especially from COVID and the Ukraine-Russia crisis. And so it is possible that there will be future shocks to and increase the supply chain shocks. So for us to ensure that we have lasting solutions for the food processing sector, we need to enhance firstly the agricultural sector to ensure that there's increased production, especially in the country, in my country, Zambia, as well as other African countries, so that we sort out the issue of food security through efficient farming methods. And one other comment that my panel colleagues on the panel have mentioned is regional integration. It's evident that there's need for increased regional integration. Sub-Saharan countries need to work together so that we trade in whatever is a surplus in a particular a particular country. We have various strengths as a region, as Africa. An earlier presenter did mention that studies have shown that Africa will be the food basket for the globe. So it's important that countries look at our strengths and start to trade into our strengths. We look at which commodities we have a comparative advantage on, so that there is trade, and not only trade in commodities, but trade into value-added products. This is only when we are adding value to our products, and also trading into products that we have a comparative advantage on is when we will grow. So that is my last comment, that we need to look at regional integration as a way to go for Africa to increase production and start to trade then to the outside world.
Thank you very much, Sopani. Now I'll turn to Madam Chatata.
Thank you so much. From here, what I'm also taking out is that as governments or as individuals, as processors, just the way we are dealing with the short-term crisis, the effects of the crisis, we also need to set our eyes on the medium term and long term. And that means just as Zambia highlighted, growing better. And then on the other hand, I'm also seeing the need to start promoting alternative staple foods. This is very critical because the masses need to be aware that beyond wheat, there are other staples that Africa is actually good at growing, like sorghum, millet, potatoes, cassavas, that we can incorporate in our diets, so that then we become more sustainable, self-sustainable, because for that, it's actually a medium-term solution, because those are already crops that we are familiar with, rather than putting too much of our effort in learning how to grow wheat, which is not our staple as such. So we need to really look at these things and really work together. I think I also like the concept of working together, because there are things that as countries we are good at because of our climatic conditions, because of how our experience. So Zambia or Malawi should be able to capitalize on their strength and be able maybe to supply Tanzania, because Tanzania is not good at that crop, but then we can also rely on Tanzania for something that they are good at. So let's work together. I've been very privileged to be part of this conversation, and we'll continue to champion the food agenda in the African region together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chatata. And once again, I would really like to express my appreciation for the distinguished panelists that have really done justice to today's discussion, but also to our audience that have been very patient and also contributed, online. And I think this discussion could be elevated to policy level. I understand there could be some few policymakers that are participating, or at least stakeholders that have an audience to the policymakers in order to take the recommendations that have been discussed here today, so that they can be put into practice. Now I'd like to turn back to TechnoSafe team. Elizabeth, thank you very much for organizing this webinar, and it will be good also to get your reaction on the opportunities for development partners.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Nyangi, and thank you to our panelists today. It has been a rich discussion, and we were thrilled that you were willing to spend your afternoon on a Thursday having this conversation with us and with our, at one point we had about 80 participants listening in. Before I wrap up completely, I would like my namesake and colleague, Liz Kay, to jump in quickly and provide a little housekeeping on the Q&A and how we will be addressing many of the questions moving forward. So Liz, could you jump in quickly?
All right. Thank you so much. That was quite an informative session. I had a good time just listening in. My name is Liz Kariuki, colleague to Elizabeth Eckert, our Chief of Party at AINFP program. I would just like to thank everyone for participating. There's some questions, a lot of questions that have not been addressed. So, and due to time, we are not able to cover all the questions, but as we send the resources after the call, we'll attempt to respond to all the questions. And there was someone in the audience who wanted to speak. We can allow that before we end the session. I don't know if Harman Bigham, you wanted to say something? You have a hand raised. We can allow you to talk and give us your thoughts.
Yes, and thank you. Okay. What I'd like to say is I'm glad that this forum was held. I really strongly feel that it's important that we realize that we're in a post-trauma situation, really that a lot of these issues existed long before COVID. And I think we need to address them with that consideration. An example for me was when Mrs. Kashati mentioned about the tea and how now tea is being utilized by the local community. Africans have been obviously not participating and appreciating their own cultural and food sources in a manner that has given them better benefit. It's very important that the mindset of our people be addressed because of their being geared towards imports in all different manner, whether it's food, appliances, et cetera, et cetera. If we are to be self-sustaining, the mindset of the people have to be addressed. I especially appreciate the gentleman from Kenya and the gentleman from Tanzania and their comments about being self-sustained. And the idea of that Africa can feed the world. Well, this is true, but what's happening right now is millions of acres of land is being taken and leased by Saudi Arabia, Germany, UK, and other nations. And, they're doing that because they realize what the potential is. And we have to actualize the potential for our own benefit because they're not coming here to grow food for Africa and Africans. So, we must utilize our traditional methods, our traditional knowledge, and provide for the benefit of and food security and nutrition of our people. Because there's, thousands of food crops that are not even being utilized. And that globally. So this set has to be dramatically shifted.
Thank you, Herman, for those comments. I'm going to stop you there just because we're running out of time and we do want to wrap up and provide everyone with some details. We will be providing a readout from this event, including the recording, and we will also provide answers to many of the questions that have been posed. I saw a lot of questions and comments coming in towards the end. As our panelists were talking about the amazing potential we have in this region, that we also need to be cognizant of the changing climate and make sure that our promotion of new crops or different crops, including alternative staples, are done in a climate smart way. We also had some comment from the audience from other countries in the region. There's quite a few folks from Uganda sharing their there are examples in Ethiopia as well. And as we pull together all of the resources and the comments, we'll be sure to incorporate some of those insights from other countries in the region. This was the second webinar from the Alliance for Inclusive and Nutritious Food Processing. We will continue to hold webinars over the next year and a half, and we try to do them along topics that are topical, they're of the day, and that are interesting for the sector. We want to make sure that we continue to drive dialogue and provide platforms for this type of conversation and discussion. Again, I want to thank all of the panelists who joined us today, and a really big thanks to Dr. David Nyangi for facilitating the session and contributing his time, not just today, but in advance, and really preparing for the facilitation. So thank you very much, and we will be in touch.
Pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.